morning, everybody. This is One-on-One Nightly coming to you on Twitter and YouTube. Glad to have you with us here this evening. Alongside the esteemed Dylan Balsamo, Nick Fado will join us later in the show. I am Jimmy Sullivan. Happy you could be along with us tonight. Dylan, good to be with you. It's been a while.
It is wonderful to see you, Jimmy. It has actually been a good amount of time just since we've chatted. So it's always good to see your face, even if it's on my computer screen.
Yeah, hey, it's the best we can do right about now, right? But it is good to see you. It'll be good to have Nick along with us as well. We will be taking you up until 11 o'clock tonight. And Dylan, a lot to get into. We were talking about this on our meeting earlier today. We've got some basketball. We're going to start there. Some Nets, some Knicks. Nets are actually playing right now. They are in Houston. They've got a big lead late in the third quarter. Dylan, Nets are looking like probably the best team out east. The Knicks might be a playoff team as well. This has been, and I've said this a couple of times, a shockingly fun year to this point in New York basketball.
Absolutely. It's, I think we're very used to having very low expectations, specifically by this point in the season, of what's going to be happening with everything in general, let alone with both teams. But the Nets are, we knew they were going to be a talented squad going in. Along the way they get James Harden, and things only get better and better for them. And then the Knicks are the biggest surprise in basketball of the season so far. Incredibly exciting, like we were talking about before the show. Julius Randle's been something else. So it's just so exciting to be a part of, really.
We'll be getting into that throughout the show. Wanted to lay out the ground rules. If you're watching on Twitter, leave a comment in the little sidebar on Periscope. If you want to weigh in on the conversation, we will get to that comment as the show goes along. So again, leave your comment. We'll try to get to it over the course of the show. Don't see any comments in there right now, but nevertheless, if you want to weigh in, just leave your comment. So we'll get into some basketball. And then, Dylan, I don't know about you. I've been really heartened this week watching spring training. Yes, the games are even more Mickey Mouse than usual. A lot of 7-inning games, some 5-inning games. But the snow's melted from my lawn. The weather's starting to get warmer. And we've got spring training baseball. And a lot to talk about with the Mets and the Yankees, because as fun as this year has been in New York basketball, we could have a really fun New York summer as well. Mets, Yankees, both going for it this year, and a lot to get into with both of them. A lot of fascinating storylines, both in Queens and in the Bronx still.
Well, to what you were saying earlier, there's just something about spring training. The metaphor of the sun coming up and the snow melting, and all of our favorite teams going down to Florida and Arizona to get ready for a long and fun and exciting summer of just playing. It's just a wonderful thing to think about. It's one of those, the beginning of baseball season is always the time in the year when I make an extra effort to feel 12 years old again. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I'll listen to the music I was listening to when I was a kid, when I first got into baseball. It's just an exciting time for me. But in terms of, it is an incredibly exciting thing. And you know what, Jimmy? Not long before the show started, you and I were recounting the stories of what our families were going through during the 2000 World Series. Fun fact for everybody at home, I happened to be at the first game of that series. I was a year old, but I was still there. So it's an incredibly exciting time. I was just reading CBS Sports this morning. They have the Yankees as the team that has the most pressure on them to win it all this year. And right in that top 5 were the New York Metropolitans. So, it's not very often that both teams from a city get that kind of excitement and more importantly, pressure around them. But it's going to make for a very fun-filled summer.
Dylan, I will just say, having learned that you were at Game 1 of the World Series in 2000, I am now holding you personally responsible for Timo Perez getting thrown out at the plate in extra innings. It's your fault.
I had a feeling we were going to bring that up. I don't know why, because I guess that's just how everybody thinks of that game, including myself. But, it was funny. I was having a conversation with my parents about it I guess a couple of years ago when they first revealed to me I was there. I didn't even realize. They were all and they kept saying like, "Oh, it was fun. You were wearing a little Met hat, a Yankee jacket, and Billy Joel sang the national anthem." And they were like, "You had a good time." And I was like, "But no, but tell me about Perez. He got thrown out at the plate. That's the thing I remember of that game." So it's interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah, I just had to. I couldn't help myself. It's kind of like when my parents tell me, like, "Yeah, you were at a bunch of Jets playoff games." I was like, "When?" It was like, "Yeah, in January of '99." I was like, "I wasn't born yet." They're like, "Yeah, but you were there." And I said, "Okay, yeah, I guess I was there. Close enough. I guess that counts." But whether we were there or not there, but sort of there, we're here now, and we've got a show to do tonight. We got baseball, and then we're going to close out the show. I think a really interesting topic as we head into Free Throw Awareness Month, March 2021, and the end of college basketball season and March Madness. This is about as unsure as I've ever been going into March Madness about what's going to happen, who's going to win, who's going to lose. It's been a really weird year in college basketball. Everybody knows that with COVID, teams have not played an even amount of games. It's hard to get a read on some of these teams, to be quite frank. But Dylan, what I will say is that we're getting March this year. We're getting March Madness. I hope it goes off without a hitch in Indianapolis. A lot of work to do in the next month, obviously, but we're going to get a bracket tournament, and hopefully it's a good one. And hopefully my champion doesn't get knocked out in the first couple of rounds. But nonetheless, a really fun year right now because I just don't know what to think of everything right now.
Yeah. Well, for one thing, you brought up that it's Free Throw Awareness Month, and that just makes it so much more ironic that during the month of March, we see Shaquille O'Neal in commercials more than any other time of the year. And the irony in there is very clear. But to what you were talking about, we mentioned the wonderful metaphor of spring and spring training that comes in baseball season. But I can't tell you, after such a strenuous year and emotionally exhausting last 368 days, if you will, the adrenaline run that you get from seeing a certain college basketball insider with a heavy social media prowess tweet his infamous phrase, "This is March." Oh my goodness, I could hear an orchestra playing in my soul. Do you get what I'm saying? Like
Yes.
it felt euphoric, and whatever it's really easy to forget the fact that for a little while we didn't have this, and then if we get half a tournament, whatever that means, whether it be only half the amount of like whatever form things come in this year, we have to feel very fortunate because we're very lucky, and we have to be very grateful because how wonderful that we get to feel like we're getting somewhere. This is the excitement that keeps us going. This is what human beings live for.
Yeah, I think this year really taught us not to take sports and even the dumb things sometimes that come with sports for granted. Mm-hmm. Like even something like the NCAA tournament. When I was in high school, every third Thursday of March at 12:15 would be in the middle of class, and some kid's computer would just go and that's just the way it was. It was awesome, and it's something that you really realize is amazing when it's gone. And you're sitting there the first Monday night in April, and there's no national title game, and you don't get to watch one shining moment. And, yeah, it stinks. It stinks, but we get that back this year, at least hopefully. I think everything's going to happen, and we'll go from there. But should be a very exciting tournament, and a lot of really weird results in college basketball. For example, last night, Illinois cruised over Michigan, which was a real surprise because Michigan had been playing like arguably the best team in the country entering that game, and Illinois, without Ayo Dosunmu, who is one of the best players in the country, just straight took it to them. So we've got a lot to cover over the next 81 minutes here on One, taking you up until 11 p.m. Jimmy, Dylan, and Nick with you. It's a great day for America, and we'll be back after this. back on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Again, we're taking you up until 11 p.m. in the East. If you want to get involved in the conversation, leave a comment on the little sidebar on Periscope, or if you're watching on YouTube, you could do the same on the side where it says chat. Again, I'm not good with technology, but I'm doing the best I can. Jimmy Sullivan, Dylan Balsamo, Nick Fada with you on this Wednesday evening. And guys, a lot going on in the basketball world, and particularly locally here in New York. Let's get right to it. And I want to start with the New York Knicks. Currently at 500, they did lose to the San Antonio Spurs last night, but nonetheless, despite that loss, they currently find themselves in position to compete for a playoff spot as the first half of the NBA season winds down. They are currently in a tie for fifth in the Eastern Conference, just percentage points behind the Tampa Raptors. So, guys, and Dylan, I'll start with you. The New York Knicks could possibly be a playoff team. One game left in the first half. How impressed have you been by the way this team has played in the first half of the season under new coach Tom Thibodeau and with the incredible play of Julius Randle?
Well, impressed is one word to use to describe it, but to be honest, I think the more accurate word, and maybe even perhaps the more pleasant word, is surprised. Because impressed kind of means sometimes means there's an expectation to do such, and I just don't. The Knicks have exceeded to this point any expectation we would have of them to this point in the season. So it's all biscuits and gravy for them, which is wonderful. But in terms of, they might just squeeze in a playoff spot this year. It looks like they're going to, at least if the first half is any indication. And I've found in my time watching basketball that making the playoffs, specifically if you're the 6, 7, 8 seed per se, can be a little deceiving as to the state that your team is in and how close you are to winning a championship. So that's my fear for the Knicks, is that I'm not saying they're a bad team right now. They're a better team than I expected them to be this year. But, I worry that this success to this point in the season, if you want to call it that, will make them think they're farther along the trail than they are.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I want to agree. I want to leave all biases out as a Knicks fan and say, oh yeah, these guys are a super team. Best we've seen. In reality, though, it's the best we've seen. The Knicks are out to the best start they've had since 2012, 2013. That was the year Melo won the scoring title. JR won a sixth man. It was a great squad that year. They were 2 seed in the East, I believe. They're nowhere near as good as that team was, partially because Julius Randle is no Carmelo Anthony. But he's been great. Quickly's been great, of course, the young rookie. RJ Barrett's having a solid second season. They're getting players to just merge and play as a unit. I always give credit to Tom Thibodeau. Without his coaching, him leading the way, the Knicks are nowhere near the team they've become. For me, I think any sort of Knicks fan or even basketball fan, unless you're obviously a rival Boston fan or whatever, we don't got to talk about that. But you want to see the Knicks in the playoffs at least, just for some sort of sense of excitement. Let them play the Sixers in the first round and maybe even get swept. I would be content. I think most Knicks fans would. For me, I just really think it depends on. It does depend on Randle, and I think his all-star play will continue. I see them being probably, like you said, a 6 seed, Dylan, where they're not going to make much noise, but the noise comes from the fact that the New York Knickerbockers will be in the playoffs.
And that's, I think it's one of those things, and you bring up a great point, Nick. There are certain teams that, when they are good, the league is better. Not just in the NBA, but across sports, right? The Yankees, I put the Knicks in that conversation. And I think there's more intrigue when a team like the Knicks, I mean, you see how Knicks fans are reacting. Like, I'm assuming, Dylan, I know you're on Twitter. Nick, I'm assuming you're on Twitter. And you see how Knicks fans react to this team when they win. It's incredible every night. Like, oh, they're a game over 500. And there was a video the other night outside the Garden. They had just beaten the Pacers, and people were going nuts. And I guess it was a lot of the people who had attended the game. They were high-fiving. They were screaming. I wanted to laugh at it, but that is genuinely, I think, how Knicks fans feel right now. Like, oh my goodness, we're going to watch competitive basketball in the second half of the season, which we haven't seen. I think a couple things to keep in mind here with the Knicks. So, not to throw rain on the parade here. I don't like doing it. I'm just going to do it anyway. So far this season, Knicks have played half their games. Their strength of schedule is second to easiest in the league so far this season. And, you know, they have some good wins in there. I will vouch for that. They've beaten Utah. They've beaten Portland. Like, they've beaten some good teams. Indiana the other night. That being said, no matter if they make the playoffs, get knocked out, whatever happens, we should also remember there's the play-in tournament in the NBA this year. So if you're top 10 in the East, you'll at least have a shot. And then if you're from 7 to 10, there's a little play-in tournament before the playoffs. But I think even if things go off the rails in the second half of the Knicks this year, I think this season is a success because I think they have instilled the culture under Tom Thibodeau where they have the second best defensive rating, I should say, in the NBA, first in scoring defense. They play really hard every night. And look, I think we also need to be real. Like, talent-wise, this team is still probably not very good. As much as I hate to say it, like, Tom Thibodeau is probably getting about the most out of this team that they could probably get. And Nick, you speak as a Knicks fan, and you give Tom Thibodeau a lot of credit. And I think where you see that is in really across the roster, but I think in a guy like Julius Randle, because we were talking about him last year and saying, he's productive, he's expensive, he gets some empty points, but he is not, a number one option on a playoff team. But Nick, I've been so impressed by Julius Randle this season, where not only has he dramatically improved his game physically, mentally, and everything, but he has become an all-star. He's become, this season, a top 20 player in the league, and I think that's beyond Knicks fans' wildest expectations entering the year.
Yeah, you know what? Like you mentioned earlier, Jimmy, the excitement of Knicks fans is perhaps the most, perhaps the greatest part of all of this madness is that to see long-suffering fans be so energetic, and Knicks fans, it's worth saying, are supportive no matter the state of the team. They are the Swifties of basketball. They are there all the time. And I look at this Knicks team, and at this point in the year, you know who they remind me of? Jimmy, you'll get what I'm saying. I'm sure Nikki will also. The 2019 Mets. If you look at them, the excitement that surrounded the team in late July to early August after an improvement of the team. Any Mets fan will remember that big Todd Frazier home run. I think you were at that game.
I was there, yeah. I thought the building was going to come down. It was crazy.
I wouldn't be surprised if there had been structural damage that night. Just from watching the game on TV, you're like, this is crazy. And for that team, the big success of the year wasn't a certain playoff spot. It was, oh my goodness, we played meaningful baseball games in August. This hasn't happened in a very long time. So Nick, what I'm really thinking is, no matter what place they end up in this year, the building of that culture, it's really the mentality that is the success to take away from this year.
Absolutely. I think the Garden especially too, like you said, the building coming down. Imagine playoff time, you can get more fans, hopefully with the pandemic, hopefully winding down. You can see, I don't know, when was the last time Knicks were in the playoffs? It was 2012, 2013. You look 7-8 years where it's just silence come playoff time in that building every time. Why not make it? I mean, listen, the finals obviously is a long way for this Knicks squad, but why not make it like 1994 where you got the Knicks and the Rangers trying to battle in the playoffs at the same time? Obviously both teams are in different scenarios with the success that they're having, but it's just that culture that needs to be built back, and it is slow and steady. It's not going to be a one season type of thing. But I guess I'll requote both of you guys. Impressive and surprised is surprising, is what this season has been for the Knicks. I don't think there's any better way to say it. I said it last week on the show as well. Julius Randle, one of three players averaging 23, 11, and 5. Him, Giannis, and Jokic. 2 MVP candidates, and then in my opinion, you could argue 3 with Julius Randle. So it's that leadership, both from the coaching spot with Tibbs, like I said, and with Julius Randle, it's just been out of this world so far this season. And I have faith and I hope, it's going to continue through the second half after the break.
I will also say about the Knicks, and we'll talk about the Nets later on in the segment, but the way the Nets were able to attract Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant to Brooklyn, and then James Harden over the past few weeks was in part because of the culture they had built over a few years with Sean Marks in that front office, rebounding from perhaps the worst trade in NBA history. And in 2018-19, with a team that was probably a little overmatched going to the playoffs, and yes, they got knocked out pretty easily by the 76ers, but you could see that they could do it. And Katie and Kyrie went there and said, hey, they've got cap room. They have a really smart front office. They had Kenny Atkinson as the coach at the time. He has since been fired, but the culture was in place. And I think Tom Thibodeau, Leon Rose, I think especially deserve a lot of credit. And the next part of the conversation here that I kind of want to touch on, and Nick, I'll go to you first on this one. So there's been this discussion from the Knicks fan point of view of, yeah, this team's decent. They play hard. They're talented enough, I guess. But what if you could get a Bradley Beal, a star? If you could trade for a guy like that, I'll ask a two-pronged question, which I hate to do, but I think it's necessary here. Do you make that move? And if so, what are you willing to part with to make that happen?
So I've thought about this extensively, so I'm so ready for this, and my opinion certainly has changed. From the start of the season, my answer was absolutely yes, 100%. Do whatever it takes, get this team to be something, please. I'm sick of watching this basketball. But then Julius Randle changed. Tom Thibodeau brought in, it's once they started playing as a cohesive unit, and I realized, oh my God, these guys can actually win games consistently. I realized, okay, I don't want to trade then. Don't blow this up. Because that's what was missing for the Knicks. I'll say it again, the culture. This team wants to play together. They play hard. They play together for 48 minutes a night. So it's really just the difference of the culture that changed, where I thought, yes, blow it up. This is not the team. But now I think it is, and I think it could continue to be. Again, I'm not expecting a finals berth. I'm not expecting anything crazy, but to say the Knicks could make the playoffs this year is something no one's been able to even say without laughing after in 5-6 years. So it's to me, I would say absolutely not at this point. The Wizards should move Bradley Beal, but again, that's a whole different topic. But I don't think the Knicks touch anything now. You have something in place, especially too. Who knows what the Mavericks going to do out in the West if they even sneak into the playoffs? But if they end up getting a worse record than they have now, the Knicks got their first round pick next year. So it could keep building this sort of culture, this youth, whatever you want to make out of it or call it. So I would say now, absolutely not. Start of the season, yes. And Randall was my guy to say, get out. Get rid of him while you have value. But with what he's done to this team, is his value at an all-time high? Absolutely. But to us, to the New York Knicks, I should say, excuse me. So it's, in this case, just absolutely not. Don't make a trade. Stick with what you've got. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
So what's worth saying about, and to wrap up about the Knicks this year specifically. For one thing, the Eastern Conference, I think, has a lot of really good teams this year. You look at Philly and Boston and, of course, Brooklyn, like we've been talking about, and Milwaukee. And the Heat and Pacers will continue to improve as the season goes on. So, if the Knicks squeeze into one of those 8 seeds, great. In the 10 seed, awesome. But it might not happen this year. But the progress that was made in this year in terms of mentality and the building of a culture and some kind of surprising success is notable, and it's almost tangible. And you look at a team like Philly. What is the thing we've been saying about Philly for years? What is it?
Coaching.
Yeah, I was looking for trust the process.
Oh, well. Sorry.
Trust the process.
It's okay. And we jokingly said it for years because it was ridiculous to keep hearing. But guess what? It's working.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing Knicks fans need to remember, and they seem to be very understanding of. Look, it's not all going to happen in one night. That's what happens with teams that are not successful for a long period of time. When they find that inkling of, we have something here. They dive in immediately, and it almost never works. But this Knicks team seems like they're building up a little bit higher of a front office IQ than that. So if I'm the Knicks, I take things a little bit more slowly than that, to a point where you got something and continue to build on it until you've really nurtured something that will make everybody happy.
I will say a lot of the talk around the Knicks possibly acquiring a player has been around Bradley Beal and Victor Oladipo, neither of whom I believe are represented by CAA, neither of whom went to Kentucky, which means probably neither of them are going to be on the Knicks. That being said, I'll kind of disagree with you, Nick, just on the point that everybody knows, you need stars in the NBA to win. And this Knicks team, don't get me wrong, they've played hard and they deserve a lot of credit. Julius Randle's your star, and we talked about this on one-on-one the other day. I was on with Emmanuel Barbari and Nick DeLuca, and this subject came up. And I was sitting there saying, you know what? If the Knicks can bring in Bradley Beal and somehow also be able to keep Julius Randle, that's perfect. Now, I'm not saying that would necessarily happen, but you need stars, and I think if the Knicks can do it without destroying their roster, because I wouldn't put it on the level with like the Nets getting James Harden, because James Harden is a top 5 player in the NBA. Bradley Beal, as great as he is not that. But I think if you can find a way to do that without, destroying the rest of your team, I would do it. And I think that's where the Knicks stand right now. But nonetheless, whether they make any moves at the deadline or not, my guess is they'll probably do something more minor. They deserve a lot of credit. The front office, coaching staff, the players really have been outstanding. I just want to touch this point quickly before we move on to the Brooklyn Nets. We have a lot of experience at Fordham in the A10 with Obi Toppin. And Knicks rookie has not gotten off to a great start in his career, but he's going to be in the dunk contest. And that'll be held at halftime of the All-Star game Sunday night in Atlanta. Dylan, I'll go to you first. Your first impression of hearing that Obi Toppin, pride of Dayton, will be in the NBA dunk contest as a rookie for the first time.
Well, for one thing, it's great exposure for the Atlantic 10 Conference, which, as Fordhamites, the three of us and everyone in our department is going to be advocating for the rest of our sports lives is pay attention to the A10 because this is an exciting conference. And everyone knows Dayton's a good team, but it's fun around them. So it's very exciting to see that. But, we've talked a lot about the culture the Knicks are building. And to have someone as eccentric and as has as much potential as Obi Toppin. Maybe he hasn't made it completely work yet, but there's still something there. That's going to be another vital part of this team. That is what defines a successful team in the New York area. It just is what it is. So, you continue to hope for that for Obi Toppin, and I'm sure you do also, Nick.
Yeah, for me, I think it's just great exposure not only for the A10, like you said, but for him as a player, as a young guy. How awesome is that to be there? All-Star weekend or All-Star night, I should say. But I also think, he has gotten to a slow start. Of course, he wins this thing. Who knows? It could build some confidence, and maybe he takes a jump in the second half of the season. I'll be rooting for him, of course. I think it's a weak-ish dunk contest pool. Usually there are 4 competitors as well, and there's only 3 this year, but obviously different circumstances. I think he's got a real shot at winning it. Everyone knows the guy can jump through the roof. But I really think the key is if he can win it, it's more, I guess, it's more confidence for the Knicks organization. Just, look at this, we got a winner here. You'll see the memes of the banner going up saying 2021 dunk contest winner Obi Toppin, just like when Porzingis won the skills challenge a few years back. But not only will be confidence, for the Knicks seeing another win in that category, it's also for Obi Toppin. If he wins this thing, who knows? Could be just a big boost, rise in his confidence, and maybe you see his minutes go up, his playing time, and his skill, I guess, as well. It's a huge night for him, I guess. So,
yeah, and it's really funny to look at how things have worked out for the Knicks draft picks this year. Everybody heralded Obi Toppin when they drafted him. They said, this is the guy, this is the get. They go draft Emmanuel quickly late in the first round, and I don't think anyone really had that strong of an opinion on it. I actually kind of liked it at the time just because he could shoot. But quickly comes into the league. Knicks fans love this kid. They're begging for him to start every night, basically. And Obi Toppin, just seems a little bit lost out there. But we'll see what happens on Sunday night. The rest of the field, as you said, Nick, 3 participants. It's Obi, Cassius Stanley from the Pacers, and Anthony Simons from the Portland Trail Blazers. All right, let's move over to Brooklyn. They just wrapped up against the Rockets, actually, a 132-114 win. I think that's 12 in a row now for Houston that they've lost, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody correct me on that in the comments if I'm wrong. But nonetheless, the Nets right now looking like probably the best team out east. They made the deal for James Harden. He has been tremendous. And I know we talked about this last Wednesday. I wasn't here, but Nick and you, Andrew, and Ryan talked about this last week. Are we to the point this season? And Nick, I'll start with you on this. And forgive me if I'm being a little redundant here. Are we to the point where this is not championship or bust, but win the East or bust this season for the Nets, who now have 3 superstars in tow? And the only problem for them really at this point seems to be getting all 3 of them on the floor together. But once they are, they seem to be unstoppable.
Yeah, absolutely. I said it last week. They're my pick for the finals. No questions asked. I think it's championship or bust. Absolutely. I think if they don't win the East, it's a joke, honestly. The talent on that team, especially, I mean, you have 3 of the best offensive players, not right now, of all time, on one team together. They just scored 132 points in a game. Very high. Of course, it was against a bad team, but you're right, Jimmy. If they get all 3 guys on the court consistently, I don't think anyone in the league can stop that team. Whether or not other teams score, the Nets defense has been questionable. But in reality, you win the game of basketball by scoring more points. Defense wins championships, they say, but no one's seen an offense like this. You could argue the Warriors, of course, but KD, Kyrie, Harden, I mean, it's absurd. And they got shooters around them, and Joe Harris. It's just a scary, scary team to face when they're healthy. But the when they're healthy is more of if they're healthy. So I think the only way they don't win, it's 100% championship or bust. Only way they don't win this finals is if they can't get their guys on the court, all 3 at once. I just don't think it's possible for anyone to beat them in 4 out of 7 games if they're healthy. So healthy Nets wins the championship. Easy money for me on that one.
Yeah, they say defense wins championships, but I don't think the 27 Yankees were worrying to go outside and play grounders every day. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So here's my thing is the Nets are also my pick to represent the Eastern Conference in the NBA Finals. If, as we keep saying, if they can, all 3 of them can be on the court at the same time. We see what they can do. But people tend to worry about it a lot right now when there's still half a season to go. And it becomes the main conversation point when we talk about the Nets and our worries about them. But they've also been able to, not to the same extent, but they have been able to produce when you have 2 of the 3 guys on the court at the same time, because that's still 2 pieces of offensive gold that you have on the court at one time. And you said it yourself, Nick, to have 3 of not only the best of this era, but the best to have done it offensively on the court at the same time is something. But to have 2 of them it's less, but it's still quite something that other teams will not have. And, we worry about things being healthy. If the Nets continue to produce like they have been, things will eventually fall into place. By the time we hit the playoffs, all 3 of them will be on the court at the same time. So that worry for me is not as prevalent as it is for other people. But perhaps you disagree with me, Jimmy.
No, I think I agree. And I think this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I think the most important piece of it is Harden, to be totally honest. They trade for him mid-season. They're 16-6 since they did. And I think the really eye-opening thing, at least for some people, is that for a lot of people, they looked at Harden as a scorer. They said, this guy just puts up huge numbers. He goes out, he can get you 40 whenever he wants. And what he's shown with the Nets is that that's not just who he is. Like, he has the multitude where he can distribute. He is, last I checked, the leading assist man in the NBA this season. He can get you rebounds. He's involved in all aspects of the game. And he is the guy, I think, maybe even more so than Durant, that they just cannot afford to have him out of the lineup. Crazy as that sounds. And they go out, they trade for him. And look, I've gone back and forth a lot on whether or not they should have traded for Harden. I think ultimately it goes back to what we were talking about with the Knicks, is that you just need stars to win in the NBA. And I think the Nets go out and do that. Congratulations to them. Also, another really weird stat I want to give you guys in the last couple minutes here. So if you go back to 2015, NBA Finals that year, to now, there have been 4 different teams to win the championship, 4 different coaches to win this championship. Steve Kerr has won 3. Ty Lue won 1 with the Cavaliers. Nick Nurse won with the Raptors, and Frank Vogel won in the bubble with the Lakers. All of those first championships were by coaches who were in their first year. See what I'm saying with Steve Nash? So it can happen. And I'm obviously exempting 2017 and 18 with Kerr and the Warriors. I'm leaving that out of the conversation. But when Steve Nash was brought in, everybody's like, wow, can they win in their first year? Yes, they can. And you can make the argument they should. And I think, I just want to say this before we wrap up. I think Steve Nash has done a terrific job. They have huge personalities in that locker room. Okay, that's no secret. And he has been able to corral all of those in a very player-friendly way, which is, I think, important in the NBA. And he's just done a terrific job. People have made jokes that, well, he's really only in charge of the vibes, and maybe to an extent that's true. But you know what? Managing the vibes when you have guys like Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant and James Harden, who are outsized personalities, and I'm not even saying that as a criticism, it's just a fact. But to be able to bring all of that together and manage guys who I'm sure would love to just do their own thing, I think deserves a lot of credit. And I think Steve Nash should be getting a lot more of that than maybe he has.
That stat is absolutely baffling to me. I had no idea.
Me neither, actually.
That's crazy. I guess if I think about it, then yeah, I realized it. But it goes to show, it's very possible, and why not with this team? The pieces are absolutely there. I think, yeah, like you said, Jimmy, Steve Nash has done a great job. I think he's this sort of, it could be a new wave almost coming in of coaches who were once players. I know a lot of guys didn't work out, like Derek Fisher for the Knicks. I know that, but Nash is one of the best basketball minds the game has ever seen. Especially had D'Antoni there, his old coach from the Suns teams he played on that were offensive juggernauts themselves. And those teams didn't even have nearly the amount of talent that the Nets have right now. So the pieces are there and more, you could say. I'll repeat it one last time. Nets championship.
Basketball, like you were saying, Jimmy, is definitely, at least the way it is played today, is just an incredibly star-driven sport. Maybe it's just the nature of the fact that there's only 5 guys out there on the court, that the stars are going to shine, and it's just how it is. But the Nets have it. There's no denying it. And to have 3 of them all at one time on the court, it's going to be tough to beat, especially when you have to go up against them and have the stamina of a 7-game series on your side. It's just going to be hard.
Certainly will. And, I want to give Mike D'Antoni, Jacques Vaughn, the assistant coaches, a lot of credit for the Nets as well. Let's get into baseball coming up next. We'll take a quick break. Jimmy, Dylan, and Nick with you on Twitter and YouTube. We'll be with you up until 11 o'clock. This is One on One Nightly. goodness. We're back on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. One-on-One nightly, I should say. Twitter and YouTube, again, leave a comment if you want to weigh in on the conversation that we are having. We are about halfway through the show. I just want to circle back to the last segment we were talking about. James Harden had a triple-double tonight. I just learned that in the commercial break. 29 points, 14 assists, I think, and 10 rebounds, or maybe it was 14 rebounds and 10 assists. I'm going to look that up right now to make sure. But nonetheless, triple-double for James Harden in his return to Houston, by the way, since he got traded, and it was 14 assists and 10 rebounds. So congrats to James Harden. Congrats to the Nets on an outstanding performance tonight. And we got to get into some baseball. We were talking about watching spring training before. Storylines abounding with the Mets and the Yankees. And I've got Shea Stadium above my shoulder and the Mets pillow next to me. So we're going to start with the Mets, okay? Dylan, you're a Mets fan. I'm a Mets fan.
Yes.
And I am extremely excited for this season. Mets trade for Francisco Lindor. They more or less get the band back together. Otherwise, they also signed James McCann to be their new catcher. They make some other moves for their starting rotation. They get Taijuan Walker. They get Carlos Carrasco in the trade for Lindor. Dylan, to quote the team song, we've got ourselves a ball club, and it's going to be a fun summer in Queens.
Oh my goodness, it's going to be such a fun summer. And you know what? This is a kind of Mets team where even if there's no fans in the stands for however long that is, and who knows what is going to end up happening a month from now. But no matter what it is, whether we're in the stadium or not, it's going to be a fun Mets team to watch because they're going to be good television. Also, they're just exciting. The excitement has been building, and in the energy of this Mets club for the last couple of years. I would argue since maybe 2018, there's just been a personality to this Mets team that keeps growing and growing and growing. And the Steve Cohen era has officially started. Had its rough patches so far, but it has started, and the excitement and the energy and the character of this team is completely undeniable.
Absolutely is. And you talk about fans in the stands. I think right now it's supposed to be 10%. That could go down, that could go up. Who knows? It's a day-to-day thing with the pandemic, and hopefully also if somehow we can get everybody vaccinated in the next couple of months, maybe we won't have to have that conversation ever again. That'd be very good, because I'm kind of sick of it, to be quite frank. But moving back to the on-the-field stuff, and you talked about the offseason, and yeah, it was not perfect. They had to fire their GM for acting in a disgusting manner towards a foreign reporter. They had their former manager get outed for sexual harassment towards multiple reporters. And that's, a lot of reporting is still going through the TikTok of who exactly knew what. It does not look good for the Mets, obviously, nor should it. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, this was an offseason that you're hoping kind of builds upon a new culture. This team is third in payroll this year. They're looking to spend. They're looking to win. Let's keep in mind, too, Francisco Lindor, Michael Conforto, both up for extensions. Both could very well get extended, and that would push the payroll well above $200 million. And these are exciting times. This is, Dylan, probably the most excited I've been for a Mets season maybe ever. And maybe part of that is the times we find ourselves in, and baseball can be a respite from some of it, at least as far as the pandemic is concerned. So I guess that factors in as well. But man, this is exciting stuff. Like, the Mets are spending, they want to win. They could very well make the playoffs. Some would argue should make the playoffs. And this is just fun stuff.
Well, there's a couple things to note here. First off, in terms of you saying the most excited you've been for Mets season, I would say more specifically, this is the most excited I've been for late June, early July of a Mets season, because that's usually the point, at least in our lifetimes, when we hit a stride of, I gotta turn the TV on at 7 p.m. tonight and be sad for 3 hours, and it hits a point of restlessness that you don't really look forward to. But I'm so looking forward to June 28th and July 14th. I don't know who they're playing those days, but you get what I'm saying. they're just days that are exciting. And in terms of the bumps along the road they've hit this winter, the important thing to note is there were a lot of distractions in specifically the last 2 months. But the upside of things is that those distractions are gone now. A lot of off-season rough patches, they make their way into the regular season, but it doesn't look like that's really going to happen for the Mets this year. For one thing, they established that this is a team, this is a culture of an organization that is not going to tolerate the disgusting actions of former Mets employees. It's just not going to happen. And that's a wonderful thing to see in the Steve Cohen era. And his personal bumps that he saw in his life these last couple months, that's out of everybody's memory. You probably forgot about it until I brought it up right now. So that's very exciting. And, in terms of the Mets spending and the possibility of extending Michael Conforto and Francisco Lindor and going over the $200 million mark, I think there's a certain mentality among Mets fans, and it's not an unadmirable one. That they don't want to go over that amount. But at the end of the day, like, you play in New York City, you got an owner who has a lot of money. Of course you should be hitting that mark. Any team who had the opportunity to do that would. If the Tampa Bay Rays had that money, they would spend that kind of money. Don't be fooled. The Moneyball A's would not have been the Moneyball A's if they didn't have to be the Moneyball A's. So if you're a Mets fan, if you're anybody who enjoys watching a good team that wears orange and blue, you got to be excited. And even I know that also means the Knicks and the Islanders, but that's also exciting. It's just a time of anxiety, but a good anxiety of let's jump into this new era of Mets baseball.
Absolutely. And I will say I'll call out some Mets fans a little bit here. Okay. There was this expectation this offseason that they are going to get everyone, right? Yeah. Lindor, Springer, Bauer, and people were a lot more divided on Bauer. I didn't really want him. We found out today that according to the New York Post, and this is all true, you could look this up, Bauer, because of, if you'll remember the just 3-ring circus around his free agency, you'll remember that on his website shortly before he announced his decision to go to the Dodgers, there was a snafu where it accidentally published Mets gear, and it sent it out to people. It was really embarrassing. And he said that because of that snafu, he was going to change his decision from the Dodgers to the Mets because somebody working for him hit the wrong button. He was going to move 3,000 miles to New York. So no, I feel like the Mets will be okay.
Yeah.
I mean, look, it's not that he's a heck of a pitcher. Don't get me wrong. He's one of the best pitchers in baseball. But if you're going to change your mind based on somebody accidentally hitting publish as opposed to save draft, I mean, is this really a guy who would do well in New York?
Yeah, I meant to say that earlier. I think the fact that he did not end up in Queens was a blessing, whether it be a blessing in disguise or an obvious blessing is the beauty in the eye of the beholder, I guess. I know, and you and I actually completely agree on this. I really did not want Trevor Bauer to be a Met either. It would have been, great in theory to have the last 3 Cy Young awards all be in your stadium, if you will. But it's just, he's not the kind of personality that fits the kind of character that this Mets team wants to be, and it's clearly established over the last couple months of this is the team we're going to be. So I am also ecstatic Trevor Bauer's not a New York Met.
I just want to correct my attribution here. It was not according to the New York Post. It was according to the Starting 9 podcast, which recently had Bauer's agent, Rachel Luba, as a guest. I just read the story on the New York Post.
It sounds like a New York Post type story.
Yeah, right. But hey, it's coming from the source, so I'm going to believe it. So they don't get Bauer. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that everybody sits there and say, oh, well, they're just going to get every free agent on the market. Well, yeah, I mean, they offered Springer, they offered Bauer, they offered Bauer more money than the Dodgers did, and he ultimately decided for one reason or another that the Dodgers were a better fit. I mean, the Mets can't, hold him hostage and make him come to New York. That's not going to happen. Same with Springer. He winds up going to the Blue Jays, and arguably that makes it easier for the Mets to throw a lot of money at Lindor and Conforto on a yearly basis. So, look, this, on the field, this is a great offseason for the Mets. Not only because of the flashy moves, I think, but also, I'm watching spring training the other day. They go out, they get Kevin Pillar, Albert Almora, Jonathan VR, guys who are experienced on the bench. And you know this as well as anybody, Dylan, having rooted for this team all your life. Guys get hurt. Guys, we freak out about opening day lineups, and then it gets rendered moot within 2 weeks because somebody gets hurt or there's a rash of injuries. And obviously you don't want that. But over the course of 162, and I think especially over the course of this 162, where they haven't played a full season in a couple of years, there's going to be attrition. I think depth is going to be really important this season. And I think, Dylan, that's another area where Sandy Alderson and this front office, I think, deserves some credit because they went out and they got guys who were, not flashy or exciting moves, but competent big league ball players. And the Mets should get a lot of credit for that because you and I saw it. The Brodie Van Wagenen Mets did not have that depth. And look, there's still more I think the Mets could do depth-wise, but I think they're a lot better off than they were at this time last year.
Yeah, I think the Mets as an organization, specifically within the last 10 years, we'll say, have a history of maybe even over planning with the guys you have and not really worrying about depth too much. I mean, this is the team that I believe in 2011, Terry Collins' first year, named Mike Pelfrey as the opening day starter in January. Yes. I mean, if you have an ace on your staff, great, name him your opening day pitcher in January. And nothing against Mike Pelfrey, but he's just not that guy. So it was really odd to see. I remember even as an 11-year-old thinking, I was like, this is a little early. Yeah. What? But something I'd really admired, and in retrospect, what we know about the 2018 Houston Astros, it alters the way we had thought about them. But I remember thinking during their championship run in 2017, thinking, wow, they took all the great underappreciated, unsung utility players almost of the last 5 years, and they got them all on one team. And that's what made them great. You had your superstars of Carlos Correa and Jose Altuve and George Springer, whatever you want to say. But those guys are the ones who are going to be playing the most important games that win you the division on August 31st when you don't even realize it. Those are the guys, the Josh Reddicks. You know exactly who I'm
Jake Marisnick, yeah.
Yeah, precisely. This is what the Mets are doing right now. And it's very if you're a Mets fan, it makes you very enthusiastic for okay, we don't have to worry if Brandon Nimmo can't play a game in the outfield. There's a sense of there's more that depth. It adds it weakens your anxiety about the team, which is great.
Definitely does. There's a lot of storylines with the Mets. Pete Alonso coming off a quote-unquote down year in which he would have been on pace for 43 home runs. Edwin Diaz coming off an up year in which he didn't pitch in front of anybody. So that's an interesting storyline. Seth Lugo is going to be out for the first few weeks of the season. Probably a big year for Luis Rojas as manager. Last thought on the Mets. We'll get Nick back in here when we talk about the Yankees. The over-under in Las Vegas, which is usually right, is 90 games. For the Mets. 90 wins, I should say. Are we going over or under on that for the Mets this season, and why?
It's tough because I think 90 is it's just a perfect number for this team, I think. I'm going to go slightly over, but maybe that's just me being a little too optimistic. And I'll be honest, this is a tough division this year. I think the Braves. Yeah, it's either going to be the Braves and the Mets that wins this division. The other team will be the wild card, I think, the first wild card most likely. But it's going to be a really tough fight in those dog days of mid-August, which I keep talking about. But and there are still improvements to be made on this team. Brandon Nimmo has a real Achilles heel of hitting against left-handed pitchers. He's got to work on that, and he's going to be a guy that you think is going to start on this team. So there are those things that need to be addressed. And I think this is a Mets team that will be able to address them as the season goes on. And they'll be able to fix those things, and that'll be fantastic. But I would say slightly over for 90, but I think 90 is just the right number.
Yeah, and I think the defense is also, I think, a problem for this team. I mean, no offense to Dom Smith, and I'm not criticizing Dom Smith. He's not a left fielder. and he's going to be playing left field. He's going to hit, don't get me wrong. But the outs above average for the Mets last season, the starters on this team, if you take out Lindor, -20. That's bad. So, I don't need to explain that to you, but I think that'll hold them back a little bit. I will also say slightly over. I will say National League is stacked this year. Dodgers, Padres, Cardinals, Braves, Mets. You can make the argument about the Nationals having a bounce back here potentially. Maybe even the Phillies. There's a bunch of good teams. Brewers as well, I think, could be really good. There are a lot of teams you look at and you say, that team could go to the playoffs and maybe would go to the playoffs in a different year, but not this year in the National League. Really, really good, and I'm really excited to see it. A league that is not stacked is the American League. And let's move over and talk about the New York Yankees. We'll bring Nick Feta into the conversation for this as well. Nick, I'll go to you first. This is a big year for the Yankees. There is the idea out there that because of the state of the American League, because of the state of this roster, because of the way it has been built, that this year is the type of year that you need to win the American League. We had Johnny Stremski on the show from WFAN the other day. He said the Yankees have to win the American League this year. Nick, I will pose the same question to you. You look at this Yankees team, very high expectations. Do you think, as a fan of the Yankees, they need to win the American League this year for Aaron Boone's sake, for the front office's sake, to live up to expectations?
Yes, 100%. It's, I guess, a little bit of other teams obviously have been less fortunate than the Yankees have been with playoff appearances and wins and all that, but it's been the same team for 4 or 5 years now that hasn't been able to get to the World Series. And it's I still have total faith. I love this team. I love the guys on the team. The AL certainly got weaker. The Rays, big decline. You could argue the Astros even. It shouldn't be that difficult to get there this year, in my opinion. It really shouldn't. It's just the matter of fact, the Yankees can actually execute for 2 series. They should not have to play a wild card game. They should win the AL East pretty easily. The Blue Jays could put up a fight, but I don't think so. They should have to play through the ALDS, ALCS, World Series. That should be it. They should not have to play a wild card, anything. But that's besides the point. Yes, they need to make the champion. They need to make the World Series. It's to me, I can't believe they haven't with this team. Obviously, they've had some good teams to play in front of them. They've had some injury issues. That always is, in my opinion, the biggest issue with the Yankees. Can they stay healthy? There's always 1 or 2 guys that go down, miss either the whole season, the majority of the season, and then they're just they're not themselves. So I think to not get there this year is absolutely ridiculous. Get there and then worry about the National League. Don't worry about the National League until you can actually get to the World Series. There are a lot of teams out in the NL who are much better, in my opinion, than the Yanks. Padres could be surprising. Obviously, they made a lot of moves. Dodgers, of course, are going to be back. But that's not the Yankees' problem until they get to the World Series. And that until is still an if. But they should not have much of an issue. I think every Yankees fan, I have not been alive for a World Series, or I guess I have, excuse me. I've been alive for 1 World Series win. I was 8 years old, so I don't have great memory of it. We've had great teams through the 2010s, but nothing to show for it. So it's got to happen. It's got to happen. At least get there and give yourself a fighting chance. I said this last show too. The Yankees almost remind me of like the Saints of the MLB, where they are always good, always, but then play in that playoff series or game, of course, in the NFL, and don't show up. Where are you? So that's the real issue for the Yanks, but they got to get over that hump, and there's no better year than this year. Bounce back after the shorter season. It was hard to get in stride for every team, but bounce back, work your way through the AL with ease is my hope, and then World Series comes, that's when it's showtime.
Well, real quick here. Forgive me for not knowing this. We're dancing around it a little bit. Are we getting the same playoff format this year as we did last year in baseball?
No, it's going back to the old playoff format. We think. Okay, I'm hesitant to answer anything definitively, but it's going to be 3 division winners, 2 wild cards, and on, because they couldn't agree on anything else, basically.
Just like it was back in my day. So yeah, so I think it's very easy to put that pressure on the Yankees. And you know what? I'm going to. I think we talk about the Mets. You look at a team like the Mets, and you can very happily go. The pressure is on because it's exciting. This is not as often with the Yankees. It's very much more very stern. The pressure is on. I don't care how good the American League is. The American League could be 100% better than the NL is this year. It's not going to be. But even if it was, that pressure remains on the Yankees. They have been in the playoffs every year. They have, by all means, improved themselves as a team this offseason. Acquisition of Kluber and Jameson Taillon and extending LeMahieu proved to DJ LeMahieu that he made the right decision staying with the Yankees. I think we tend to look through the golden aura of Yankee teams past to go, oh, well, of course it was the Yankees, a successful team. The 2010s were not very good to the New York Yankees in terms of their regular standard of pennants and World Series championships. Kind of a failure. Hate to say it. Sorry, Joe Girardi. Sorry, Aaron Boone. But it just didn't pan out like that. So that pressure's really on the Yankees to, I think, more than just the American League. You got to win it this year. And you know what? If you really want to prove you're the team that's as good as you've been talking about in the Aaron Judge era, you got to win next year too. And I know that's jumping a little far into the future, but I'm sorry, it's just how I feel.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting because I go up and down. I look at the 8 teams that made the American League playoffs last season. I could talk my way out of any of them for winning the American League. That's the way this league is this year. All right, the Rays lost their 2 best pitchers, Blake Snell, Charlie Morton. Okay, they're down. The Blue Jays are better, but probably not good enough to really compete in the American League yet. Cleveland got rid of maybe one of the 10 best players in baseball, so they're not going to be better. The Yankees have a very questionable starting rotation, which I know you guys talked about last week, and we've gone over at length on this show. The Minnesota Twins, I don't think, are meaningfully better. The Houston Astros got rid of George Springer, so they're not going to be better. Let's see here. Oakland A's, their bullpen's worse. They traded for Elvis Andrus, but they lost Marcus Semien, so they're probably not better. And the Chicago White Sox are better, but they also have a manager who's coming off the bench and who has not managed in 10 years. The American League, it's wide open, but it isn't really wide open because the Yankees should win it ultimately. And look, I think the Yankees are not in a particularly strong division. I think it's one that Toronto could be a wild card, I think, but not the type of thing. If the Yankees are playing in the wild card game, that's a big disappointment. I agree with you, Nick. Even if they deal with injuries. This is a team that has a really good lineup. They're going to score a lot of runs. Starting rotation to me is a huge question mark. I will shout out Corey Kluber. I ripped him on Saturday, but he had a really good start today in spring training over 2 innings. I didn't really rip him. I just wonder if he's enough for the Yankees. Bullpen, we'll see. But nonetheless, high expectations for the Yankees entering this season. Nick, I'll go back to you here. As you look at this Yankees team entering the year, are there a key player or players that you're looking at entering the season that you sit there and say, okay, the Yankees will be good if player X does this over the course of the season?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I could almost go through every player and think of one or two things, right? I mean, it's, again, like I said, I'll reiterate again, injuries, stay healthy. You could say that about basically any player in the Yankees starting lineup. Obviously, I want the same production from DJ LeMahieu. I think no question about that. That's coming back. I want Giancarlo Stanton to, again, healthy, play a full season, do what we signed you for, that ginormous deal. He's been underwhelming in his tenure with the Yanks so far, largely due to injury. So stay healthy and show the league that you're still there and why we got you in the first place. Gary Sanchez has got to have a better season. That
wouldn't take much.
Yeah, right? I mean, he just was nothing. I can't even compliment him from last season. It was laziness, it almost looked like in his play. He just was not there, and I get it. It was a weird season, but he's playing well so far in spring training, but show that. Come on. I could keep going. Can Luke Voit keep playing like he did? He had an MVP caliber season in that short season. I don't know if he'll be up to those standards, but Can he really be, a top first baseman in this league? We need guys to hit, and more importantly, I don't think the Yankees win the championship if the only hitter on our team who is not a home run or bust is DJ LeMahieu. We need these guys to change that approach up. I don't know if it's just, I don't really have an answer as to how, considering I'm not a professional athlete, but it can't be home run or bust every at bat, because that has not won them anything in the past 10 years, really. And with this team, the past 4 or 5 years. So those guys are my main guys. I think Aaron Judge has got to perform, I think, as well, obviously. I could go through everyone, but there's no need for that. I think, again, health is my number one concern. And the guys who really were not there last year have to be there this year. And guys who were there last year, can you keep it up? It's just every team is a huge puzzle. If the pieces all fit together at the right times, this Yankee team could be absolutely ridiculous. It really is a matter of if.
Yeah, it really says something about the American League when this is the clear favorite to sweep every round of the playoffs, and there's this much that they need to improve on. The Yankees are really a team where you can poke a lot of holes in even the best of their players. Giancarlo Stanton hasn't been fully healthy in like 8 years. Dating back to the Florida Marlins, quite frankly. Kids, for those of you that don't know, before the Miami Marlins were the Miami Marlins, we called them the Florida Marlins. So picture Miami, but more. Anyways, so I have my doubts about Giancarlo Stanton. I usually, there are times I forget he's a Yankee, quite frankly, just because it's easy to forget. Gary Sanchez, I'm very critical of, and I will continue to be, because he's just the guy's just got a little bit better defensively, just still is not a very good defensive catcher. So when he's not producing offensively, it's dead weight on the team. You get what I'm saying? And, I became very disillusioned with Aaron Judge this season also. I mean, he's, a really talented player, but it's when he's not producing at the level we expect him to be, which is to hit 350 and hit 40 home runs, it's very easy to go, well, I guess he's not what we thought he was. So there's lots the Yankees need to improve on. And like I mentioned earlier, you kind of got to prove to DJ LeMahieu, like, there was a reason you signed to stay in the Bronx. And specifically come October, because the Yankees are able to get into the playoffs as they have been for the last, 3 billion years, something like that. They need to prove that they're a good enough team that they can solve the problems they have in the season by the time they hit the playoffs.
That's a big question mark. And just one more number I want to throw out there. Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton in the last 2 years played 38% of the Yankees games. Not near good enough. Needs to be a lot higher percentage. Before we go to break, I just want to quickly mention Yankees manager Aaron Boone. He today had surgery to insert a pacemaker in his heart. Obviously, we wish him the best and a speedy recovery. It seems like he's going to be back at work pretty quickly, but obviously, when you hear pacemaker and issues with the heart, that's obviously scary stuff. So my best to Aaron Boone for, as much as Yankee fans and other people as well, I think, criticize him. He does have a lot of respect in the game, it seems. And so wish him nothing but the best of health as we go into this season and hopefully a quick and speedy recovery that allows him to get back to the Yankees in short order. We've got about 20 minutes left, maybe a little less here on One-on-One. Let's talk some college basketball coming up next. Nick, Dylan, Jimmy, with you for another 20 minutes or so here on Twitter or YouTube. Again, leave a comment in the sidebar. We'll get to it as soon as we can. You're watching One-on-One Nightly, and we'll be right back. one-on-one last 15 minutes or so of our show. I'm Jimmy, along with Dylan and Nick, talking some college hoops. Last few minutes here. Folks, this has been a crazy year in college basketball. It's been a crazy year in sports, but this has manifested perhaps more than anything on the college side. This is a year in which the blue bloods of the sport, if you will, don't have a seat at the table. I'm going to read off some teams that are typically in the dance, going well into the tournament, and I'll tell you where they are here. This is according to ESPN Bracketology. Joe Lunardi entering tonight. It may have changed in the last couple of hours. I haven't checked. Michigan State, last 4 in. They would play a play-in game in Dayton. Duke, first 4 out. North Carolina is a 10 seed. Kentucky is out. If you want to put Syracuse in that category, which is debatable, they are, I believe, next 4 out as well. Dylan, I'll go to you first on this one. Bizarre college basketball season, March Madness in the offing. What do you make of everything that's been going on right now in college basketball? A lot of teams we don't typically see at the top line or on the top line, and a lot of teams we typically see at the top line or at or near being out of the tournament. A fascinating season as far as I look at it.
I completely agree. And well, for one thing, if you're a fan of one of those top line teams, it's not only disappointing, but it can be very difficult to accept because, you know, as the entire world has felt for a year, you're like, you probably feel like we really got slighted, and I can't believe that. Like, how are they letting this happen? And you know, and unfortunately, those fans and those programs are just going to have to say, look, you can call this season what you want. You can count it in your record books. Maybe you won't, and that's fine. But this season is what it is. You're just going to have to accept that. If you're one of those teams that is finding themselves in a position higher than they usually find themselves in, you probably feel a little bit of imposter syndrome, thinking maybe it's just the nature of this season. But guess what? You're there, and it's great for your program, and it's great for the exposure of your program. So I hope those teams realize that they can just take it and run with it, and hopefully they can dance for as long as they are called for in March Madness. And it's the beauty of this particular month of college basketball that even with those great teams, we never know what's going to happen. So it just makes it that much more exciting.
You know, I'm kind of happy that it's weird to say, but I'm kind of happy these teams are not going to be, 1-2 seed like they always are. I just think it's cool to see. You got teams like Illinois is one of my favorite teams to watch. Iowa's usually a good program, but they're up top. It's good to see different teams taking those top spots, especially, it's been a weird, crazy, year in sports and around the world, of course. But this is fitting, almost that these top teams are not in it because it's just you don't know what's happening. You don't know what's going to happen. So it is. I like the fact that those teams aren't in there because, like you said, Dylan, it gives these other teams a chance to dance. It's just really cool to me. I cannot wait for March 18th, the Thursday, when we get going with March Madness. It's just arguably the most exciting time in all of sports, you could say. Just because, again, you never know what's going to happen. And that the fact that these teams are not in it, always just working their way through the early parts of the bracket, I just think it's a really, really cool thing to see for a lot of smaller programs.
I'll read you off the ESPN Bracketology current 1 and 2 seeds. So the 1 seeds right now. Gonzaga, okay, that's typical enough. Michigan, they had a good year. They're usually around the top. Makes enough sense. Illinois, Baylor, those are the 1 seeds. You've got Illinois and Baylor, 2 teams that are maybe typically pretty good, but not at that level. Now the 2 seeds, this is where we get really interesting. Got Ohio State, maybe not so crazy. Iowa, best player in the country in Luka Garza. Alabama was a team I love, and Houston. This is great. I love this. This is great parity in college basketball. But more than anything, like I can sit here with a straight face before the show starts, and we were all talking about college basketball, the 3 of us, our shadow, Tyler Who. And I said that with a straight face, if Alabama's in the right region, they're going to the Final Four.
Yeah.
And it's I might be wrong on that, but it's something I think, and it's something I can say with a straight face without being laughed out of the room because they're really good this year. It's cool. I think it's good for college basketball, and we were talking last year before the tournament. Like Dayton was going to be a 1 seed last year. I was maybe sentimentally going to pick them to win it all before everything got shut down. Yeah, now we're sitting here, and it's all these different teams, and I look on those first 8 seeds, and I could be wrong, but none of those coaches have a national title, as far as I know, unless there's something I was missing with Kelvin Sampson in Houston. So this is really exciting stuff. I want to also bring this up before we wrap up here. I really believe this is a year, and I'm just going to throw this take out there, and you guys can react to it. I think there's going to be a lot of upsets this year. I don't know if it's because of the nature of the season. Almost seems like there's less good mid-majors this year, but I also believe it's been a wild year. There's been a lot of stuff going on off the court that we need not trivialize, but needless to say, it's not your typical college basketball season. We always see upsets in March to a certain degree, but I think it's going to be turned up this year. I think we're going to get a lot of upsets, a lot of great stuff going on the first weekend of the tournament, and guys, I cannot wait. I think it's going to be awesome.
My goodness, it's going to be so exciting. I also just want to first point out here, shout out to the Big 12 and the SEC, because I think the way we tend to think about it, at least in my head, and maybe I'm just crazy, but I think we tend to think of the ACC and the Big 10 typically as the top tier basketball conferences, and we'll put the Big East up there also, or maybe they're in between the first and second tier. I'm getting too specific. And then you put the Big 12 and the SEC kind of in that second tier. Still great, still Power 5 conferences, but not as good as the Big 10 and the ACC typically. That completely flipped this year. You look at teams like Baylor and Illinois and Iowa and then Alabama, and you go, wow, this is great. Not only just specific programs, but different conferences are getting that light that the ACC and the Big 10 teams get. But in terms of what the actual tournament has in store for us, I agree there's going to be a lot of upsets just because of the nature of, like, there are going to be programs in this tournament that are used to the tournament and the way that it's set up. And this is going to be a totally different way of doing it. It's probably not going to be full capacity fans. The whole thing's happening in one city. It's a whole different monster than anyone in the college hoops world is used to. And of course, having North Carolina as the number 10 seed probably means that that's going to be technically an upset. And that's fine. But there's going to be a lot of great stuff. And you know what? I don't disagree with you about Alabama either. I think if things go right for them on Selection Sunday, they could be a Final Four team. I think Loyola Chicago could be an Elite Eight team again, depending on the way things fall. But, Nick, I'm very curious of your predictions as to what's going to happen next month.
I'll say this just because I watched the game on Saturday, and it was one of the most terrific performances I've seen by a college player. Scared to think that he's younger than I am, too. It's frightening to think that there's a person out there younger than me with that much talent in the game of basketball. Cade Cunningham and the Oklahoma State team, wow. I think they could do something crazy in the tournament. Simply because of that kid. He's the best player in my opinion. Yeah, Luka Garza, of course, but I say he's right up there. He's just unstoppable when he's on his game. And you put him on a big stage like that, I think marvelous things could happen for that team. So those guys are one of my kind of, I guess you could say, a sleeper pick. I like that. Like you said, Dylan, with UNC, those guys technically are going to be upset worthy, but it's UNC. That's one of those big name teams that, of course, will be in the tournament this year. It's just real interesting to me because with this year, you have a lot of teams who've just marched their way through their schedules with relative ease. Baylor lost their first game of the season to Kansas Saturday night too, I believe. They had a tough OT win against West Virginia. I also like that West Virginia team. There's just a lot going on in college basketball this year that I think once the whole bracket is kind of out there and we see everything, who's in, who's out, who's playing who when, it's just going to be I mean, it is called March Madness for a reason. It will be madness trying to pick and decipher between this team winning against that team or whatever it is. But I'll say it again. I love that Oklahoma State team. I think if I had to pick someone who I think is a team not likely to win, but if I want to just go out there and throw it in, I would say Oklahoma State. I love that team. I love what they've got, and I think good things could happen there.
Yeah, Nick, if we sit here long enough and I sim the NBA draft lottery long enough on Tankathon, we can get Kate Cunningham on the Knicks.
True. Very true.
I got it on about the third try the other night. Kept hitting Tankathon, and the Mavericks pick went right up to 1. I don't know how I did it.
Let's get lucky one time.
Let's get lucky one time. All right, this is about the 12th attempt here. Keeps landing on the Magic. Oh, well. I have to give it up. Magic and Pistons. Not nearly as fun. But nonetheless, like, there's a lot of great players in this tournament. There's a lot of great teams. Anything can happen, and I think that's what makes it so fun. And also, it's the NCAA tournament. We didn't get this last year. This is great. This is great stuff. And they've talked about, I think it's going to be 20 or 25% capacity in Indiana. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see how that goes. As long as they're far enough away from the players, I don't think it matters. Biggest thing for me is I do think the players' families should be able to go. So as long as that could happen, I didn't care if it was 300 people at Lucas Oil Stadium, to be quite honest with you. So they're getting 20% or whatever it is in the building, and so be it. As long as people aren't being stupid, I don't think it matters too much. As fatalist as that may sound, but nonetheless, a great March Madness forthcoming. A lot of great storylines to follow, and we'll see who comes out on top. And you know, my guess is, with the way my bracket's looking and the way I've looked at this, I am going to be down at least $10 by the end of this month. Probably maybe more, just by how many bracket pools I tend to enter around this time of year. But hey, again, fun to be having the conversation, fun to be talking sports with you guys tonight. And you know, we got baseball back, we got basketball in full swing, a lot of fun stuff going on in sports right now. We didn't really get to football. There's a lot of fun stuff going on over there. JJ Watt just signed with the Cardinals, so congratulations to the Cardinals on that one. A huge quarterback carousel in the league. Not a ton of news this week, so didn't really have time for that. But guys, fun being with you tonight. This has been a really fun show.
Always a blast with you, Jimmy. This is the first time Nick and I have worked together, so wonderful to work with you. I actually wanted to mention something you said earlier. You talked about the pain of seeing someone younger than you in just being an incredible athlete. Zion Williamson was actually the first big-time athlete I saw who was younger than me. And I'm sure I'm always going to have a special connection with him, whether he knows it or not. Between me and him, just because of that. And I'm sure you have that too also, Jimmy. But another thing I want to mention is, as much as I love March Madness and the actual tournament, to me, the most exciting part of March is the quarterfinal, semifinals of the conference tournaments. I think that's just the most exciting thing in all of sports. I love it so much. So I am really looking forward to the next week or so.
Yeah, it means a lot, dude. There's just so much at stake in those games. So it is good to see kind of those lower tier teams, make it and see what they can do. It was a pleasure, guys. I had a blast tonight. Love talking sports. Pleasure to do business with you guys. That's all I got on my end.
Same here. I just want to say before we go, if you were doubting the conference tournaments, Texas Tech is like a 7 seed in the Big 12 right now.
True.
They're really good. So there's a lot of good teams that are going to be lower seeds in their conference tournaments than they are in the NCAA tournament. So that'll be fun to see. Great show, guys. Fun being with you. For my partner, Dylan Balsamo, and Nick Feda, I'm Jimmy Sullivan. Have a great rest of your evening. Our producer has been Alex Wools, and One on One, as always, is a production of WFUV Sports.